to the show. Well, Egypt is known for its pyramids and pharaohs, but among human rights organizations, it's known for prisons and people held without charge, sometimes tortured and brutalized. Now, it's a place where a lot of people fear their government. And that's why what's happening in Egypt right now is a surprise. Mass demonstrations, now in their second day, against the president, who protesters call a modern-day pharaoh. The Egyptian government said there would be zero tolerance of dissent after yesterday's day of wrath. But instead of going home, protests continued overnight and into today. Thousands marched in Cairo, set up barricades, hurled rocks and fire bombs. Police responded with tear gas, beatings, and rubber bullets. The government says it arrested almost 900 people. But by nightfall, protesters showed no sign of letting up. The protests are inspired by events 2,000 kilometers away in Tunisia. They're chanting, "Get out," and they've been saying it for the better part of a month. The unrest continues unabated. Today, the new government issued an international warrant for the former president's arrest. He fled nearly 2 weeks ago, but protesters want every trace of the old regime gone, and they aren't taking no for an answer. Well, for more on the situation in Egypt, let's go to Cairo, where we're joined by CNN's Ben Wiederman. Ben, pick up the day for us. The Egyptian government is adopting this zero-tolerance policy, but how successful have they been in being able to crush the protests so far?
By all assessments, very unsuccessful. What we saw was a huge security presence throughout sort of the major thoroughfares of Cairo, and what they would do is they would crack down on any attempt at a demonstration, but as soon as they dispersed one crowd, another one showed up, and people are really sort of streaming into the city to experience this new phenomenon, big demonstrations in Egypt. Now, normally we see small demonstrations. It's usually the usual suspects of 150, 200 people, but now people from all walks of life, Muslims, Christians, men, women, workers, farmers, students, are all getting a taste for this new phenomenon of big demonstrations, all of them calling for the ouster of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak.
Oh, well, Ben, that's interesting too, as you mentioned how it's spreading amongst these various groups. So what can the government do at this stage to actually try to quash this?
At this point, it seems their only response is a security response to crack down on the demonstrators. President Hosni Mubarak has not made any public appearances, has not made any statements about the situation. The Prime Minister, Ahmed Nazif, came out to express his support for freedom of expression, but saying that anybody who gets out of line in these demonstrations will be dealt with harshly. For years, the Egyptian government has paid lip service to popular demands for an end to corruption, an end to police brutality, but they've done very little to actually address these problems. And certainly the fundamental core issue that we're hearing from every demonstrator we speak to is they want to see President Hosni Mubarak go, and there's no indication from him that that's what he's willing or even considering doing. Mark?
Ben, the events in Tunisia, that must be having a ripple effect there. I mean, for the people that you have been speaking to, are they inspired by this? Is this giving them the courage to go out and protest and fight for this political change in Egypt?
Absolutely. I mean, that seems to be one of the main inspirations for people here, is the example of Tunisia. One analyst described Tunisia's revolution as the mouse that roared. And Egyptians are saying if the Tunisians are the mice, if they are a country of only 10 million people, why is it that Egypt, with a population of more than 80 million, is not doing the same or more? People have seen that people power, the ability of a very relatively unorganized or leaderless movement in Tunisia was able to oust a long-serving dictator. They're saying, why here in Egypt, where there are no internet blocks, there are no blocks to communications until recently, they can't organize the exact same sort of movement to oust their long-serving president. Mark?
Well, Ben, the focus of the protest has been in Cairo, of course, where you are. But what about other parts of the country? You mentioned how it's spreading to different groups. Are we also seeing it spreading to different parts of Egypt?
It appears that in every major Egyptian city there have been protests of one size or the other. In Alexandria, the second largest city in Egypt, there have been large protests. We've seen posters of President Mubarak being torn down by the crowds. The most significant, however, area where there's been agitation is the city of Suez on the Suez Canal. 3 demonstrators were killed there yesterday. We're hearing reports that parts of the city have been taken over by the protesters and that the police are on the complete defensive, really unable to bring the situation there under control. So that seems to be the situation in every major Egyptian city. There are protests, there are demonstrations, and the police are struggling to keep them under control. Mark?
Well, you may be witnessing history, Ben. Thanks so much for the update. We do appreciate talking to you tonight.
Anytime.
Well, what's happening in Tunisia and Egypt is making other countries in the region nervous because once decades of pent-up frustration over poverty, corruption, and injustice boils over, well, rebellion has a habit of spreading. And we saw this a few years ago with the so-called color revolutions.
It started in 2003 in Georgia after contested elections. Demonstrators stormed parliament, and the opposition leader confronted the president.
This was all about who would blink first, and second we weren't going to do that.
The president resigned, and it became known as the Rose Revolution. In 2004, a disputed vote in Ukraine launched the Orange Revolution.